You probably won't believe me, but I don't care. If this story reaches one person who avoids that place, then maybe it's worth telling. It started 6 months ago, July 3rd, 2023 to be exact. I had just been fired from my cashier job at a grocery store in Modesto, California. Bills were piling up. My car was on its last legs, and I was running out of excuses to give my landlord. I was desperate. I came across the job posting at a library bulletin board, of all places. It was a plain piece of paper pinned next to ads for guitar lessons and babysitting gigs. Gas station attendant needed, $22 per hour, Desert View Tower, California, housing included. It didn't list a phone number, just an address. I didn't think twice. Gas stations are easy work, and the pay was surprisingly good. I packed a bag, filled my tank with what little money I had, and headed for Desert View Tower. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have let the car die on the side of the road before going anywhere near that place. The drive was long, hot, and miserable. Desert View Tower sits off a remote stretch of Interstate 8, just outside Jacumba Hot Springs in Southern California. I remember thinking, who the hell stops here? It was nothing but sand, cracked asphalt, and a single rusted gas pump. The tower loomed over everything like an old sentinel. The gas station was attached to a tiny building, one of those roadside shops that probably sold beef jerky and postcards 50 years ago. The now hiring sign was still taped to the inside of the dusty glass door. An older man named Earl greeted me. He was wiry, sunburned, and smelled like motor oil. Earl looked like he'd been working here since Nixon was in office. "You the new hire?" He grunted, squinting at me through dark glasses. I nodded. "Good. You're on the night shift. Nobody stops during the day. It's quieter when the sun's down." That should have been my first red flag. A gas station nobody visits during the day. Earl handed me a flashlight. It was old and heavy, the kind you'd find in your grandpa's garage. The batteries were dim, casting a faint, flickering light. "What's this for?" I asked. "Your most important tool. It'll help you read the rules." He didn't explain further. Earl left me standing in the heat with a pile of old receipts, a dingy cot in the back room, and no instructions beyond the flashlight. The first few hours of my shift were uneventful. No customers, no cars, just the sound of desert winds howling around the building. By midnight, I was starting to question why I'd even been hired. Then, the power flickered. The lights inside the gas station dimmed, humming like they might go out altogether. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it across the counter, muttering curses under my breath. The beam of light sputtered and blinked. At first, I thought the batteries were dying, but then I realized it wasn't random. The flickers, they were in rhythm. Dot, dot, dot. Dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. Morse code. My dad had been in the Navy, and he used to teach me little codes like this when I was a kid. The light was spelling something out. I grabbed an old gas station notepad and started writing down the flashes as they came. Rule 1. Turn off the gas pumps by 12:30 a.m. Rule 2. Do not open the door for anyone after midnight. Rule 3. If you see headlights in the parking lot, hide behind the counter. Rule 4. Never look directly at the tower after 2 a.m. Rule 5. Refill the flashlight batteries before dawn. Rule 6. If the phone rings, don't answer it. Rule 7. Don't leave the rest stop until your shift ends at 6 a.m. Rule 8. If a customer asks for water, say it's broken. Rule 9. When you hear 3 knocks, don't respond, no matter what. I stared at the list. The rules made no sense. None. I thought Earl was playing some kind of joke on me, but the flickering light continued. spelling out the rules again and again until I memorized them. I felt sick to my stomach. Something about this place felt wrong, like the whole building was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then I heard it, from the far end of the parking lot. 3 knocks. The sound came again. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks echoed from the far side of the parking lot. I froze. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned the lot through the cracked window, squinting against the darkness. Nothing. I wanted to believe it was the wind against the rusted sign, or maybe an animal scavenging through the trash near the pumps. But deep down, I knew better. The knocks were too deliberate, too human. My mind raced back to the rules. When you hear 3 knocks, don't respond. No matter what. I turned off the flashlight and backed away from the window, careful to keep quiet. My sneakers barely made a sound as I crept behind the counter, curling up on the cold linoleum floor. For a minute, maybe 2, there was silence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I stayed still, counting each breath to keep from losing my nerve. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps. They crunched over the gravel in the lot, drawing closer to the station. I could see shadows moving outside through the cracks in the window blinds. Tall, elongated shapes that shifted and swayed like they didn't quite belong to the people they were supposed to be. How many of them were there? The footsteps reached the door. I saw the doorknob twitch. They're testing it, I thought. I clamped a hand over my mouth as the knob rattled softly, as though whoever or whatever was on the other side was waiting for me to make the first move. The rattling stopped, but the shadows remained, pooling against the glass door. That's when I heard the voice. "Excuse me, is anyone there?" It was a woman's voice. Soft, tired, and distant. It sounded wrong. Too hollow, too flat, like someone mimicking a voice they didn't fully understand. My pulse quickened as the voice came again. "I just need some water. Please. It's so hot out here." I squeezed my eyes shut. Rule 8. If a customer asks for water, say it's broken. But the rule didn't say what to do if you didn't answer at all. The shadow moved again, closer this time. Through the flickering flashlight beam, I saw something press up against the glass. A hand. No, not a hand. The fingers were too long, the nails sharp and black like obsidian. It left a smear across the dirty glass as it moved downward, leaving trails like burnt marks. Then it was gone. The footsteps retreated, crunching back over the gravel until I couldn't hear them anymore. I stayed hidden behind the counter for what felt like hours, clutching the flashlight to my chest, too terrified to move. When I finally dared to stand, my knees were shaking. I scanned the parking lot again through the window. Empty. Just darkness and the tower looming in the distance. I flicked the flashlight back on. The beam sputtered weakly, but it worked. My eyes darted toward the clock. 2:01 a.m. I swallowed hard. My shift was far from over. The tower was visible from the gas station window, an old, crooked silhouette that looked older than time itself. Earl had said nothing about it when I first arrived, but something about the way it loomed unsettled me, like it didn't belong here. I leaned against the counter, the flashlight beam dimming again. I cursed under my breath. Rule 5. Refill the flashlight batteries before dawn. I didn't have much time. The storage room was in the back, a cramped space full of dust, rusted tools, and boxes of old receipts. I rifled through drawers, searching for batteries. That's when I noticed something strange. Carved into the wooden shelves, just faintly, were words. I squinted and held the flickering light close. "Look at the tower, and it will look back." I staggered back, nearly knocking into a toolbox. I didn't want to look. I didn't even want to think about looking. But some twisted instinct pulled me to the front window. The tower loomed against the night sky, its jagged edges stark against the stars. And then I saw it. A light. Not a normal light, but a faint orange glow flickering in the top window. Like a flame. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as though someone or something was holding a lantern up there. Is someone inside? The thought shouldn't have terrified me as much as it did, but it sent chills crawling down my spine. My gut told me I wasn't supposed to see that. My gut told me to back away and forget I ever noticed it. And then the flashlight flickered out completely. The entire gas station plunged into darkness. I froze, my breathing shallow, the world around me too quiet. And then, from the tower, I heard it. Soft, distorted, and carried on the wind like a curse. "Alice, come up." I dropped the flashlight. The voice shouldn't have reached me, not across the parking lot, not over the sound of my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. "Alice, come up." It came again, clearer now, curling through the cracks in the gas station walls like smoke. I stood frozen, staring at the tower outside, my breath hitching with every second that passed. The orange light in the top window flickered again, swaying back and forth as though calling to me. Don't go. Don't even look at it. I broke my own rule. My hand moved on its own, gripping the flashlight's cold metal casing as I crouched to pick it up. I clicked the button repeatedly, praying for the beam to flicker back to life. Nothing. Just darkness. I backed away from the front window, my shoulders scraping against the counter as though the station itself might protect me. I thought about the rules, each one flickering through my head like a desperate warning. And now I'd broken Rule 4. Never look at the tower after 2 a.m. I'd done it. And now it knew I was here. The voice returned, softer this time, rising up like a whisper from beneath the floorboards. Alice, we've been waiting. The floorboards groaned under my feet, vibrating as though something deep beneath the gas station was stretching awake for the first time in years. My eyes darted toward the front door. The key to my beat-up sedan was still in my coat pocket, just a few steps away. If I ran now, I could make it. I could be gone before the voice came again. But something stopped me. The sound of footsteps. Not outside. Inside. From the back room, where the old storage shelves sat covered in decades of dust, something shuffled forward, step by step. I turned toward the dark hallway, the hair on the back of my neck standing up as the sound grew louder. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. A figure emerged. The light from the parking lot barely reached inside, but I could see enough. A man stood in the doorway to the storage room, swaying slightly on his feet. He was wearing a uniform, not the dusty work clothes I'd seen Earl wear, but something older, something out of time. A gas station attendant's shirt, faded blue, the fabric threadbare, and on his head was a cap. The cap didn't fit him. It sat crooked on his skull, casting half of his face in shadow. The other half, I don't know how to describe it. Like his skin had been pulled too tight, stretched over bones that weren't shaped right anymore. His mouth opened. Alice, the light's out. I stumbled back, slamming into the counter hard enough to send my shoulder screaming in pain. The flashlight clattered to the floor again. I didn't pick it up. I didn't dare move. The man stepped forward, the sound of his boots like stones scraping against wood. He lifted one hand, a hand with fingers far too long and nails stained black, and pointed toward the door. "You need to go to the tower." His voice wasn't a voice. It was a wind, a scraping of metal, a sound that didn't belong in the world. "You left the light on. Go fix it." He was closer now. I could smell him, the sickly sweet scent of something rotting. I turned and ran. I burst through the front door, the old bell above it jangling as I stumbled outside into the night air. Gravel crunched beneath my feet as I sprinted across the parking lot, the gas pumps rising like rusted gravestones in the moonlight. My lungs burned with every breath, but I couldn't stop. I glanced back at the gas station only once. The man was standing just inside the doorway, his silhouette framed in the light. He didn't move, but I knew he was watching me, waiting. The tower loomed ahead of me. It looked bigger now, wrong somehow, like it had grown in the dark. The faint orange glow still flickered from the top window, casting long, shifting shadows that danced across the ground. I reached the base of the tower and stared up at the wooden door. It was old, its surface warped and cracked. A faint scratching sound echoed from the other side. "Go fix the light." I didn't want to go inside. My entire body screamed at me to turn around, to run back to the car, to leave this place behind. But I couldn't shake the thought. If I left now, whatever was in that tower would follow me. I grabbed the rusted handle and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Dust, rot, and something that reminded me of burned wood. The air was thick, heavy, like the tower was holding its breath. My flashlight was still dead, but the faint orange glow from above spilled down the spiral staircase in weak, flickering lines. I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me. The spiral staircase stretched upward into the darkness, the faint orange glow at the top my only guide. It was quiet inside the tower, too quiet, like sound itself had been swallowed whole. My footsteps echoed as I placed one foot carefully in front of the other, each creak of the wooden steps making me flinch. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run. But the moment I'd stepped into the tower, the air shifted. It was heavy and suffocating, like a weight pressing down on me. My escape route no longer felt real, as though the gas station and the car were a million miles away. As I climbed, I began to notice the walls. They weren't smooth like they'd seemed from the outside. Carvings, scratched deep into the wood, lined every surface. Words, names, hundreds of names etched into the tower's ribs, overlapping and stretching toward the unseen top. Some were old, barely legible, the letters worn and faded. Others looked fresh, the cuts still jagged and splintered. Alice. My name. I froze, staring at the wall in front of me where it had been freshly carved. I reached out to touch it, but the wood was ice cold beneath my fingertips. I yanked my hand back, my heart hammering. Keep going, I thought. Don't look back. The higher I climbed, the colder the air became. I could see my breath fogging in front of me, the sound of my shallow breaths bouncing off the walls. The scratching sound I'd heard from outside. It was louder now, as though something was waiting for me just out of sight. The light above swayed, flickering in a slow rhythm, and I realized it wasn't a lantern. It was fire. Flames, dancing inside a glass enclosure, swayed unnaturally, as though someone was breathing on them. I don't know how long I climbed, but it felt endless. When I finally reached the top, my legs were shaking. A small wooden door waited there, the kind you'd find in an old attic, warped and brittle from age. I hesitated, placing my hand on the splintered surface. My skin prickled with goosebumps. From the other side of the door, I heard a sound. It wasn't a voice, not like before. It was humming. a low, droning tune that sent ice-cold dread through my bones. "Do not open it," my instincts screamed. "Turn around." But my hand moved on its own, the wood warm now beneath my palm. The humming stopped. I pushed the door open. The room at the top of the tower was small, circular, and filled with smoke. The source of the fire, the swaying light I'd seen from below, was an enormous lantern sitting atop a pedestal in the center of the room. The flame burned brightly, but it didn't feel like light. It was wrong. The glow cast warped shadows across the walls, twisting and crawling like they were alive. And then I saw him. The man standing next to the lantern wasn't a man anymore. He wore a gas station attendant's uniform, an old one, stained and tattered, and his cap sat perfectly on his head. His face, however, was featureless, smooth, pale, like the flesh had been stretched too far over his skull, leaving no room for eyes or a mouth. He tilted his head toward me, as though he was listening. "You're here." The voice didn't come from him, not exactly. It vibrated in the air, crawling over my skin and into my ears. I staggered back, bumping into the door, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand, pointing toward the lantern. It was then that I noticed something else. At the base of the lantern were more names, dozens of them, etched into the pedestal itself. I stepped closer, my legs shaking, and read the names one by one. Earl. I stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach. Earl, the old man who'd hired me. His name was here, scratched into the wood like a scar. "You took his place." The voice came again, soft but unrelenting. I turned to face the figure, but he was gone. The room was empty except for the lantern, its flame flickering wildly now, as though it had a life of its own. The carved names glowed faintly, and I understood. Earl had been the previous keeper. He'd passed the torch to me, the same way it had been passed to him. The gas station wasn't a gas station, it was a trap, and the lantern was its beating heart. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were blackened, soot-covered, and trembling. "You're part of it now." The door slammed shut behind me. I turned and pounded on it, screaming, but it wouldn't budge. The flame from the lantern grew brighter, filling the room with its unnatural glow. I felt myself being pulled toward it, my legs moving on their own. "Alice, keep the light on." It's been 2 weeks since Earl vanished. The Desert View Tower job posting has returned. Same words, same address. Yesterday, a man named Mike showed up, early 30s, down on his luck. Earl's voice, or what's left of it, told me to train him, just like I'd been trained. I handed him the flashlight and gave him the keys. "Keep the light on," I told him. He asked about the rules. I didn't answer. As Mike wandered into the gas station, I looked out toward the tower. Its flames still burned, swaying softly in the dark. I know I'll hear his screams tonight. Same as Earl's, same as mine. But the light stays on. It always stays on. And now, I wait, until someone comes to take my place.